What we do really counts in evaluation. More and more we are faced with constrained resources, and we need to communicate on what works and what does not work, what is more effective, what is less effective, so that we present the data and then they can inform the decisions that have to be made. And sometimes those are hard decisions, but at least the evaluation can shape those decisions. So what we do is more than ever relevant. My name is Loveena Dookhony. I am the lead for the Humanitarian evaluation team at UNFPA. My vision for evaluation is that we are a real partner in peace building. Many times we do an evaluation to check the box as accountability, which is important. But I think it's important to have a feedback loop and to do more rapid evaluation so that the program people who's actually implementing the projects can adapt on the fly. I think it's very important that we remain focused on the why and how a change has happened or not happened and dig deep into that. So this is something that UNFPA has been doing for a long time, and I see us keep doing that. The one thing that I would like to see is to move away from supply type of evaluations where, we're putting evaluation reports, we're doing evaluations, and be more demand focused. For instance, when I say demand focused, we approach the people that we work, our main stakeholders, in the evaluation team. For instance, for me, one of our main stakeholders is the Humanitarian Response Division, and do a mapping and say, this is the evidence that we have on X, Y, Z. Is there a evidence gap that we don't have enough evidence on? And have that demand come from them. Oh, but we want you to look into ABC, we don't have enough evidence. And IEO, I have to say, based on having worked at other organizations, IEO is pretty good at it. They've been doing this, and I see it now that I've joined IEO over the past 3 months. I see that it's a highly consultative process where we check with our main stakeholders on what type of evaluation is needed and what are the evidence gaps. In terms of the main trend, I think there's a real boom in real-time data and digital technology that's going to change the way we do evaluations. And I will focus on humanitarian evaluations. Things can change within 1 minute, within 5 minutes, within less than a day. And I think this access to having tools that allow us to collect real-time data will help us to be able to shape the programs and react to those changes. So one of the tools could be remote sensing data, remote georeferencing data using GIS, where, we collect, you don't have to be physically there, but you can have access to, with satellites, have access to see whether people are having access to services, where UNFPA has facilities, whether those facilities are being used, whether if you've done an intervention, after you've done an intervention in an area, do you see there's a reduction in GBV, and making those type of linkages. I think those tools can really help with getting real-time data. To remain relevant for humanitarian evaluations, I think it's very important for the evaluations to be real-time and, to be frank, to be less lengthy. Right now, we have our evaluations on average can take up to 1 year from the start of the process till the end. And I think especially for humanitarian evaluation, sometimes we could miss the boat. Things have already changed because humanitarian, the context changes so many times. So I think to remain relevant, we need to explore ways on how we can shorten the process, but not at the expense of rigor. Another point that I think when I think of how to remain relevant, when we talk about humanitarian, many times when we're talking about implementation and evaluation, there's this linear model that we follow on HDP, which is humanitarian and development and peace continuum. First, you do the humanitarian part, and then you do the development part, and then you do the peace part, which we know in reality, in the field, that's not what happens. Many times they intersect. One happens before the other one, or they're happening at the same time. So I think there's a need for humanitarian evaluations to look at those connections between those three pieces, look at the interconnectedness, look at the coherence between all three different pieces. And there's a need to do more evaluation that will look at that. So to remain relevant, I think there's also a need to increase accountability to the affected population. I will tell you a story. 20 years ago, when I was just starting my career in evaluation, I was doing interviews and data collection in a refugee camp in Ngara in Tanzania. And it was a group of women, it was a focus group discussion. And at the end, one of the women who I was working with, an interpreter, and one of the women asked me at the end of that, what are you going to do with this, all this data or everything that you're collecting? Because her point of view was, we've had other people come and ask us questions. And I could feel there was a bit of like interviewee fatigue. Like, people keep coming, different agencies, different consultancy firm keep coming, but then, we go, we collect our data, we write our report, we publish, but rarely do we ever go back to the community and say, this is how the data was used. So I think that was 20 years ago, and I do not know how much progress we've made in the past 20 years. So I think this is something if we want to remain relevant, because at the end, it's all about the people whom we're serving. So I think increasing accountability to affected population is very important. And the other thing that we have to do, and that UNFPA Independent Evaluation Office is doing well, is focusing on maximizing the use of the findings and the report. Too many times, we do a report, it's filed somewhere in a folder on Google Drive, and then we do a webinar, and then it's done and dusted. I think we've been having recent conversations right now that if we want to remain relevant, we have to take a more proactive role. For instance, when we think of there's a discussion that's going to happen on humanitarian programming, or we could try to see whether we can influence the process by being present, whether online, but being there to share the findings, recommendations, and refresh people's memory on this particular report that came up with these findings and recommendations, so that it can influence the future program designing. Another thing that we could do to remain relevant is do no harm and be aware of power dynamics when you're doing any humanitarian evaluation. I can give you another story. I was just recently, a couple of months ago, in Chad, and we were doing a focus group discussion about a humanitarian evaluation, and we were doing a focus group discussion with a group of women in a camp. And the women were sitting on one side, and there was one man sitting on another side, and the man was the one who was supposed to be translating. But in the end, he was actually answering all the questions I was asking without consulting the women. So, at the end, 3-4 minutes of this, then I respectfully asked him whether we could just have the space with the women, because there was another translator. His role was not even translator. He was the head of the community, but he was answering on behalf of the women. So we respectfully asked him whether we could just have the space with the women and just the local interpreter. And it was fine. And he was like, no problem. But you could feel the dynamic completely change as soon as he stepped out of that little hut. And then it was a conversation with the women. So being aware of those power dynamics is very important when you do humanitarian evaluations. I think the biggest technology and how it's going to shape is obviously AI. We have to see it as a friend. It's here to stay. AI cannot replace our jobs, but it can really help us to get better at doing our jobs more efficiently. AI in evaluation can help us to process a large amount of data more quickly, more efficiently. When we talk about mixed methods, we can look at how AI facilitates the amount of data that you collect on the field, which is qualitative data, and combine that with that quantitative data that will give you more richer insights. And AI can really do that. We've been playing with these type of tools that we have right now at our hands, and we can see that it helps. But you need a human to be doing it, doing the prompt engineering and putting the right commands in when working with AI. I foresee AI transforming humanitarian evaluations by making us more effective and efficient at doing evaluations. This is a tool that we have at hand that we should tap into. It's something that might take days without the use of AI to process a large amount of data. And AI can help to facilitate, to shorten the amount of time, and also to deepen the insight when we combine large qualitative data with quantitative data. In terms of risk of AI, I see two main risks. One being the algorithmic bias, and what I mean by that is, what goes into the data that you put in AI is what comes out. And for humanitarian data, many times there are holes in the data. We don't always have complete data, and that could bias what comes out of that analysis, which is why it's so important to have a human being who's actually doing the prompt engineering and giving pointers of what type of data to use and putting the framework. So I don't think at this point AI can do it by itself. Maybe in 30 years that will change, but for now we definitely need humans. Another challenge that I see with AI, because I've been experimenting with it, is it can sometimes be a black box. In terms, You ask the question, they give you an output, you get the data, and some AI that I've used, some tool that I've used, you don't know how they came up with the answer. Some of them are better at citing, this came from here, this is the source of the data. And then there are some that are like, we don't know, is this answer true? It sounds true, but is it true? So I think can sometimes be a black box. So we have to be careful of what type of AI tool we're using. And I personally prefer the ones that actually cite it. This is where it's coming from at the end of every, analysis that they're doing. This is the source of the data. And not all AI tools, I think, are doing that yet. I'll tell you a story. Like many times we plan evaluations, data collection, and one time we had put a lot of energy. There was an evaluation team. We had to put a lot of energy to do the data collection in DRC, in North Kivu. And then just on the day that we were supposed to leave and to start the data collection, we had an attack on a healthcare facility. So everything was thrown up in the air. We had to rework the whole schedule, not even just one day. It was for the whole next 2 weeks. Things had to be changed. So you have to be adaptable to that. You have to, find ways of still getting your targets while adapting to the changing context. One other skill that I think is important to have is both the quantitative and qualitative skills of data collection. I started my career and my training was purely quantitative. I was doing economics and econometrics, and my very first job straight out of grad school was to work for the World Bank, crunching data, running a regression analysis, writing program files to extract data, and it was purely quantitative for the first 4 years of my career. 15 years later, I've also picked up on the qualitative skills by doing training on my own, by doing classes on qualitative data collection. And I think it's very important to have both. Another skill that I think is important that I'm personally still working on is how do you tell the story? I think we get lost in the details of acronyms, our findings, the structure, our findings, conclusion, recommendation, that I think we can improve the way that we tell our story so that people absorb it and people internalize it. So it's a skill that I'm still working on. How can we help young and emergent evaluators? One is definitely through mentorship. If we could pair up the young evaluators with a more seasoned evaluator so that he or she can mentor that young person. I've been mentored myself especially in my younger days when I was starting my career 20 years ago, and that has helped me a lot. And at that time, I remember my mentor telling me things that I did not want to hear or telling me things that I didn't think made sense. But now, in retrospect, I'm like, oh, this is what she meant. And I'm glad that I listened at that point. The other thing that we could do to help young evaluators is to give them an opportunity to have hands-on experience and to work in the field, to be part of an evaluation team. And talking about how we can also help them is making sure that professional development programs speak about learning soft skills.